success breeds success and failure breeds failure, and it's not necessarily linear. Very many people have very little and a tiny minority have a tremendous amount. That's happened in every society that's ever been studied. Why there is inequality in a society, and it's easy to consider that it's because the society is corrupt. The Pareto distribution looks like this. It doesn't look like a normal distribution. A lot of you guys have been told about normal distributions and how many things follow on normal distribution, but that's really a limited case. You've all played Monopoly, I presume. At the beginning, everyone has the same amount of money. Will include property, the same amount of wealth. Then what happens as the game progresses, and really as a function of chance, I mean, I know you have to use your head a little bit in Monopoly, but the basic rule is just buy everything you can get your hands on and then trade meanly, something like that. So at the beginning everybody has the same amount, and then as you begin to play, if you had enough players, you would develop a normal distribution, because some people would win relatively consistently and some people would lose relatively consistently, and so the money starts to be distributed in a normal distribution. But the thing about money, and the thing about lots of things, is that zero is involved, and zero is a weird place, because if you're playing a trading game and you hit zero, then you're done, and it's very hard to recover from zero. And you know when you're doomed in Monopoly, you can tell. You've got some resources, but there's going to be some crisis when you land on some hotel and you're going to get wiped out, you know it. So there's a point at which you're headed for zero, even if you have something, and you might be rescued by luck, but you know when you're doomed. So what happens is that as you continue to play Monopoly, more and more people stack up as zero. Fewer and fewer people have more and more money, and when the game is over, everyone has nothing except one person, and they have all of it. Now, the funny thing about that is that in some sense that's how trading games work. You might wonder why there is inequality in a society, and it's easy to consider that it's because societies are somewhat or horribly corrupt. Trading games tend to produce a Pareto distribution so that very many people have very little and a tiny minority have a tremendous amount. That's the 1% that you hear about, right? And the thing about that 1% is that that's happened in every society that's ever been studied. It doesn't really matter what the governmental system is. It certainly happened under the Soviets, that's for sure. And there was a lot of people who had enough zero so they just died. It's very hard to fight against that distribution pattern when people are trading, because mere statistics will do that. I should tell you as well that the Pareto distribution governs a lot of things. Like if you look at books, if I remember properly, last year there was something like 1 million English language books published, and I think 500 of them sold more than 100,000 copies, which is none, right? That's none. And of that 500, you can be sure that one of them was by Stephen King, and he took half the money, because there's like 5 authors in the English language who are on every airport paperback stand occupying the top rung, and that's massive real estate, right, because it's replicated everywhere. And because they're so prominent, when people are in a hurry and they just want something to read, they just grab that, and then more money goes to those people. So success breeds success and failure breeds failure, and it's not necessarily linear. And that's a really difficult thing to deal with, and it's hard on societies, because one of the things we do know is that as you stretch out the inequality, you make men, particularly on the lower end of the distribution, more and more likely to be aggressive. It's sort of like, you imagine every man has a threshold for violence, and status is important to men. Not that it's not important to women, but it's a different kind of status. Status is important to men because it's one of the things that makes them marketable as partners to women, so it actually turns out to be quite important to men. The men tend to compete with one another for status. In a really unequal society, if you're like a low-rung guy and you don't have any opportunity to rise because the society isn't structured so that there's mobility, then the more aggressive guys tend to turn to criminality. So you could say there's a threshold for criminality, and the more inequality pressure you put on a particular area, geographic or political area, the more inequality pressure you put on it, the more men slip past that threshold and into criminality. So the Pareto distribution governs all sorts of other things too. I mentioned it governs the popularity of books, the sales of books. It also characterizes the distribution of everything that people produce. So if you think of creative production of any sort, artistic production, industrial production, it doesn't matter. Almost everything fails, and a few things succeed beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Apple's a good example of that. The iPhone, they have their competitors, but it's an extraordinarily dominant product, and they rake in billions of dollars. I think the richest 40 people in the world have as much money as the bottom 2 billion. You know, it's not like they're stuffing their mattresses with that money, or they have a skyscraper full of cash. That money is out in the economy doing whatever money does. You know, you can't spend $28 billion, and sometimes you can even do some good with it. You know, Bill Gates seems to be doing something reasonable with his money. But the reason I'm telling you this is because one of the things you should know is that this proclivity for inequality is pervasive among the creative products of human beings.